Who first carved a doorway beneath the Vatican that leads to a star no longer in the sky? The question rose inside the silent corridor like a breath held for centuries. Soft dust drifted through the air, stirred only by the footsteps of the lone archivist moving deeper into the forbidden wing. The walls felt older than the city above, older than scripture, older even than memory. A faint chill brushed his skin as if something unseen watched him pass. He carried no torch, only a small lantern whose glow trembled with each heartbeat. The air grew colder with every step. He felt the weight of countless forgotten prayers pressing from the stone, urging him to turn back. But curiosity pulled harder. At the end of the hall, a sealed bronze door waited, framed by symbols that shimmered faintly, reacting to his presence. He lifted a shaking hand toward it, feeling the echo of a truth that had been buried long before any religion learned to speak. The first breath of cold air slipping through the bronze seam carried a strange scent, like damp parchment left untouched for 1,000 years. Lorenzo stepped back, steadying his lantern as the symbols dimmed, leaving the corridor in a hushed stillness. His eyes drifted to a smaller stone panel beside the door. Its surface cracked and almost forgotten. Dust clung to it in thick layers, yet beneath the grime he saw faint lines of a script he had never encountered. It flowed like water, rising and curling with a rhythm that felt alive. He brushed a sleeve across the stone, revealing more symbols that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. They were older than Latin, older than Hebrew, older than any human record he had studied. As he traced a looping character, a soft hum vibrated through the stone, so subtle it felt like a memory rather than a sound. In that quiet glow, he realized he was staring at a language from before history, something written by hands that had walked the world long before the first prayer was ever whispered. Lorenzo hurried back through the narrow passage, the ancient symbols still burning in his thoughts. When he reached the dim reading room, he found his mentor waiting by the long oak table. The elder historian looked up slowly, as though he had sensed Lorenzo's discovery long before he arrived. The room felt smaller than usual, held tight by the weight of unspoken stories. Lorenzo spoke quietly, sharing what he had seen, and the older man's face paled in the lantern's glow. He lowered himself into a chair with a heaviness that came not from age but from memory. In a hushed voice, he revealed rumors whispered only once in a generation. Rumors of a hidden manuscript called the Primordial File, sealed away to protect the world from truths too heavy to bear. Lorenzo listened as the elder described symbols said to predate all languages, carved by beings no scripture dared name. A shiver moved through the room, not from fear, but from the sense that the past had just reached out and touched them both. The hidden passage felt different when they returned together. Father Domenico moved slowly, one hand grazing the wall as though greeting an old ghost. Lorenzo held the lantern steady as they approached a recessed archway he had overlooked before. It was narrow and carved with delicate spirals that pulsed faintly in the warm light. The elder paused, breathing deeply, then pressed a palm against the stone. To Lorenzo's shock, the carvings brightened in response to the rhythm of his heartbeat. A gentle tremor rippled through the air, and the spirals widened like an opening eye. Father Domenico whispered that some doorways were crafted not for keys, but for living touch, built by hands that measured trust through the pulse of a heart. The stone warmed beneath his fingers, answering him with soft vibrations. Lorenzo watched in silent wonder as the archway shifted, revealing a thin, dark corridor beyond. It felt like stepping into the pulse of the earth itself, guided by a language older than human breath. The corridor behind the shifting arch felt untouched by time. A cold breath rose from its depths, carrying a metallic scent that settled on their tongues. Lorenzo's lantern flickered, its flame shrinking as though afraid to disturb whatever slept within. Father Domenico stepped inside first, his movements slow, cautious, almost prayerful. Their footsteps echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the narrow stone walls. Ahead, a final chamber waited, sealed not by a door, but by a veil of darkness so thick it looked like ink suspended in air. As they approached, The darkness thinned, revealing carvings of faces neither human nor divine. Elongated, gentle, watching. The air turned colder but not cruel. It felt like the breath of something remembering itself after centuries of silence. Lorenzo reached a hand toward the chamber, and the inky veil rippled like water disturbed by a pebble. Something inside whispered, not in sound, but in understanding. The chamber held memory, and it had just awakened. The chamber's darkness thinned slowly, revealing a stone altar at its center, carved with lines that shimmered like embers beneath ash. Lorenzo approached it with careful steps, his breath shallow in the cold air. The altar held a manuscript unlike any he had seen, a thin sheet made of something not quite leather, not quite metal, its surface shifting softly like the skin of a living creature. As his lantern light fell across it, the ancient symbol stirred, glowing with a dim blue radiance. Father Domenico murmured that this was the chronicle of the first light, a manuscript rumored to describe a sky that existed before human memory. Lorenzo touched the glowing edge, and a vision flickered at the edge of his mind. A world bathed in pale gold, where horizons curved differently and shadows stretched like threads. The warmth of that strange sun pressed against his chest, leaving him breathless and trembling. He realized the chronicle was not simply written history. It was a window into an age older than Earth's own dawn. The chronicle opened slowly beneath Lorenzo's fingertips, its pages unfolding like petals, responding to warmth. Symbols blossomed across its surface, arranging themselves into soft waves of light. As they watched, the shapes formed images, tall, slender figures walking across a landscape lit by twin suns. Their movements were calm, deliberate, filled with a gentle grace that made them seem neither human nor divine, but something between. Father Domenico whispered that early monks called them the first teachers, being said to guide humanity before language formed. Lorenzo felt a quiet ache in his chest as the figures knelt beside primitive humans, touching their foreheads with luminous hands. The scene carried no violence, only tenderness, as though these beings saw something fragile and precious inside the early people. Lorenzo wondered why such gentle figures were erased from every record. What had frightened the world so deeply that their memory had to be buried under centuries of silence? The chronicle shifted again, but this time the images grew darker. The figures of the first teachers faded, replaced by old sketches etched by trembling hands. These were not made by the luminous beings, but by early monks, desperate to record what they barely understood. The drawings showed warnings, circles crossed by jagged lines, symbols of silence, fear, and forbidden knowledge. The monks had left notes in their own script, describing sleepless nights spent hearing whispers from the manuscript, as though it spoke directly into their thoughts. Father Domenico read their final line aloud. "We feared not the beings, but the truth they revealed about us." Lorenzo felt a chill. The warnings were not about some external danger, but about humanity's origins, something the monks believed could shatter the spirit if made known too soon. A sense of fragile dread filled the chamber as they realized this was not a forgotten record. It was a message carefully hidden to protect the world from itself. A soft pulse of light rippled through the chronicle, revealing a final sequence the monks could not decode. Lorenzo leaned in as the symbols fluttered and rearranged, forming shapes that resembled nerve paths or branches of a tree. Then the realization struck him. These were diagrams of early humans, but not as they were, humans being altered. The first teachers appeared again, touching the primitive people, whispering something that changed their eyes, their posture, their awareness. It was not creation. It was awakening, a deliberate shaping of consciousness, gentle yet profound. Father Domenico exhaled shakily, whispering that humanity had not been born fully formed, but guided into itself by hands older than Scripture. Lorenzo felt his heart tighten. This truth carried neither malice nor domination. It felt like a gift. But he also understood the danger. If humanity was shaped once, it could be changed again. And that fear alone could tear faith apart. The final page unfolded with a slow, heavy glow, like a sunrise pushing through storm clouds. At first, it showed nothing but swirling lines, but then a single symbol emerged, a spiral with 3 intersecting rays. Lorenzo felt a jolt of recognition. He had seen this same symbol carved into the bronze door in the first corridor. Father Domenico stared at it with dawning dread, realizing the truth. The chamber and the chronicle were part of the same design, created by those who had shaped early humans. The spiral was not a warning, but a pathway, meant to guide seekers deeper. A message left for a future when humanity was strong enough to face its beginnings. Lorenzo felt both awe and sorrow. So many centuries had passed, yet the truth had waited patiently, sleeping beneath stone and secrecy. As the glow faded, he whispered that they were no longer searching through history. They were standing inside it. The chamber's glow faded, leaving Lorenzo and Father Domenico standing in a silence that felt deeper than darkness. They followed a narrow path at the back of the room, where a small alcove opened into a hidden archive sealed behind iron bars. Dust clung to every surface, yet the air carried the faint scent of old ink and forgotten grief. Lorenzo's lantern revealed a stack of brittle parchments tucked inside a recessed niche, each marked with the same spiral symbol. He lifted one carefully, and as he unrolled it, the ink shimmered faintly like starlight underwater. It was a confession written by a monk from centuries past, describing a night when the sky split open above Rome. He wrote of lights descending without sound, of beings shaped like thought rather than flesh, and of a voice that spoke directly to the heart. The monk had begged future generations for forgiveness, saying he could not decide whether the truth should be shared or buried. Lorenzo felt the monk's fear and wonder echo through the parchment, as though the man still whispered across time. Lorenzo opened another parchment, and this one contained detailed drawings. Though aged and cracked, the images were vivid. Tall beings with elongated forms, their bodies shimmering like mist caught in moonlight. Their faces held no hard edges, only gentle contours that shifted like flowing water. Primitive humans stood before them, small and fragile, reaching out with trembling hands. The drawings captured an impossible tenderness in the luminous beings, a closeness that blurred the line between guide and guardian. Father Domenico whispered that these were not depictions of angels, but memories of something older than any theology. Yet, there was something haunting about the sketches. The beings seemed sorrowful, as though burdened by the weight of shaping a species that might one day surpass them. Lorenzo traced the lines of one figure, feeling an unexpected ache in his chest. A quiet longing to understand why such gentle presences had disappeared from the story of humanity. Deeper within the alcove, Lorenzo found a stack of sealed letters, bound with faded red thread. The script was elegant, written by clerics from different eras, each addressing the same agonizing debate: whether truth should serve faith, or faith should serve truth. One letter described a council held in secret, where leaders trembled as they read the Chronicle's revelations. They feared that revealing humanity's guided beginning would dismantle every belief people clung to for meaning. Another letter argued that hiding the truth was an act of compassion, protecting fragile spirits from questions too heavy to bear. Lorenzo felt the tension in every stroke of ink, the struggle between honesty and mercy. Father Domenico read silently beside him, shoulders sagging as he absorbed the conflict that had shaped centuries of silence. The voices of the past were raw and human, revealing not conspiracy, but deep concern for the world's fragile heart. Near the bottom of the pile, Lorenzo found a parchment sealed with an iron clasp. When he opened it, he felt a strange heaviness settle in the air. The letter was a decree, written in trembling Latin, ordering the Chronicle and all related testimonies to be sealed away indefinitely. It described how early church leaders feared the revelations would unravel the delicate balance between faith and hope. They feared that people would see themselves not as children of the divine, but as unfinished creations shaped by unknown hands. The decree insisted that humanity needed stories that lifted spirits, not truths that might fracture them. Lorenzo's throat tightened as he read the final line. "We bury this truth, not to deceive, but to preserve the fragile light within mankind." Father Domenico closed his eyes, whispering that every age carries its own burdens, and that perhaps this silence was the burden of theirs. The alcove grew still as Lorenzo reached the final testimony, a short note written by a monk whose handwriting was shaky but clear. He wrote that he had read the chronicle in secret, unable to resist the pull of its hidden light. What he discovered filled him with both fear and reverence. He believed humanity's origins were not meant to diminish faith, but to expand it, revealing that the universe held wonders beyond any doctrine. He begged whoever found the note to understand that truth and belief were not enemies, but two paths toward the same horizon. Lorenzo felt a quiet warmth in the words, a fragile hope from a man who had lived centuries before him. As he rolled up the note, he sensed something subtle, shifting inside himself. The understanding that the leaders of old had hidden the truth not from cruelty, but from love. And now, after so many years, the truth was breathing again. Lorenzo laid the final testimony beside the chronicle, and as the two artifacts touched, a faint tremor rippled through the chamber. The symbols on the walls awakened like fireflies in deep twilight, glowing with soft pulses that moved in gentle rhythms. Father Domenico stepped closer, his breath unsteady as the symbols shifted to mirror the patterns inside the manuscript. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, forming a message that had waited centuries for someone willing to listen. Lorenzo ran his hand lightly across the carvings, feeling warmth beneath the stone. A warmth that pulsed in harmony with the chronicle's glow. Slowly, the shifting lines began merging into a single flowing pattern, weaving a message that felt both ancient and achingly familiar. The walls no longer served as boundaries. They had become pages of a story too vast to hold in books. Lorenzo realized the manuscript and the chamber were one piece of a greater whole, designed to reveal its truth only when approached with patience and humility. The moving symbols shifted again, forming scenes that glided across the walls like memories replayed by an ancient mind. They showed early humans wandering through vast plains under unfamiliar skies, eyes wide and innocent. The first teachers walked beside them, adjusting something unseen, small sparks of awareness that brightened inside their pupils. But then something changed. The being stepped back, withdrawing with slow, deliberate grace. The images suggested a choice had been made. Humanity was not meant to be completed, only guided until it could find its own path. Lorenzo watched with rising wonder. The message was gentle, almost parental. Humans were shaped not out of dominance, but hope. Father Domenico murmured that perhaps the greatest gift the first teachers gave was incompleteness, leaving space for growth, discovery, and soul. The thought settled deep in Lorenzo's heart, warming him with both clarity and sorrow. The glowing narrative continued, revealing a quiet departure. The first teachers gathered at the edge of a vast horizon, their forms shimmering with a sadness too deep for word. They looked back at humanity one last time, their gentle faces softened by pride and fear. The walls depicted them rising into a sky shaped by strange colors, leaving behind trails of faint light that faded slowly. Father Domenico whispered that they had chosen distance, perhaps to let humanity discover itself without leaning on ancient guidance. Lorenzo felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the beings disappear beyond the frame of memory. Their withdrawal held no anger, only trust. A trust that humans would grow into their own strength. The scene faded, leaving the chamber dim once more, yet filled with a quiet ache. like the lingering warmth of a farewell that was never spoken aloud. The chamber brightened once more, revealing a final prophecy carved deep into the stone. It showed a symbol resembling a blooming spiral surrounded by tiny sparks. Lorenzo traced the lines with trembling fingers, feeling warmth pulse beneath the surface. The sparks represented humanity, not as passive recipients of guidance, but as beings destined to rise beyond their beginnings. The prophecy suggested that humans would one day surpass even the first teachers, not through power, but through resilience and the ability to grow from pain. Father Domenico exhaled shakily, whispering that the world had never been told this. Not that humanity was shaped, but that humanity was meant to evolve beyond its shapers. The revelation struck Lorenzo with quiet force. All the fear surrounding the chronicle had missed the point. The story was not one of control, but of trust, an invitation to rise. The glow slowly faded, leaving only the soft flicker of the lantern. Lorenzo stood still, feeling the weight of everything he had learned pressing gently against his thoughts. The truth did not frighten him, it humbled him. Humanity's story was not a fall from grace or an accident born of chaos. It was a long walk guided by hands that cared deeply, then stepped aside so humans could find their own strength. Father Domenico placed a trembling hand on Lorenzo's shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper, as he admitted he wasn't sure whether the world was ready to hear what lay within these walls. Lorenzo nodded, understanding the tremor in the older man's words. The truth was vast and tender, heavy and hopeful all at once. As the lantern flickered, they stood in the dim chamber, knowing they were holding a secret meant for a future yet to come. Lorenzo and Father Domenico returned to the reading room, carrying the chronicle with a reverence that felt instinctive. Dust floated gently around them, drifting in patterns that reminded Lorenzo of the swirling symbols inside the chamber. They set the manuscript on the oak table, and as the lantern's glow spread across the surface, it revealed a pile of unopened envelopes tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Lorenzo lifted them carefully, recognizing papal seals from different eras. The parchment edges were frayed with age, yet the ink remained sharp, as if the messages had been waiting for the right hands. The letters revealed private reflections from popes who struggled silently with the knowledge of the first teachers. Some wrote with fear, others with sorrow, but all carried a tenderness for humanity's fragile spirit. They spoke of nights spent wrestling with the weight of revelation, knowing that faith supported millions who needed hope more than cosmic truth. Lorenzo felt his chest tighten as he realized these leaders had not hidden the truth out of cruelty, but out of deep human love. Lorenzo opened another letter, written in a precise, trembling hand. The words carried the voice of a pope who had lived during a time of great turmoil. He confessed that he feared humanity's understanding of itself was too brittle to withstand such a revelation. Another letter spoke of revolutions, wars, and cries for meaning. The writer believed adding the truth of the chronicle to that chaos might break spirits already stretched thin. Father Domenico read quietly beside him, his face somber as he realized how many leaders had carried this burden alone. The letters painted a picture not of secrecy born from greed, but from fear that humanity's collective heart might not survive the shock of knowing it was shaped, guided, and then left to stand alone. Lorenzo felt a strange ache, an understanding that these men had protected something precious, even as they longed to speak the truth they were sworn to guard. A faint rumble shook the floorboards as they lifted the final envelope. Beneath it lay a hidden latch carved into the stone. Lorenzo pressed it gently, and a low grinding sound echoed through the room. A portion of the floor slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into cold darkness. Father Domenico murmured that only a handful of archivists had ever whispered about a second chamber, one said to hold something alive, or at least something that once lived. They descended slowly, each step colder than the last, until the staircase opened into a vast subterranean hall. At its center stood a sealed vault made of smooth black stone, humming with a low vibration that felt like a heartbeat, muffled beneath layers of centuries. Lorenzo felt the hair rise on his arms. Whatever lay inside had been preserved with immense care, as though the world above was not ready to meet it. The vault responded to their presence with a soft, resonant pulse. Its surface shimmered like frozen water, revealing delicate patterns within the stone. Lorenzo lifted his hand, hesitating, then pressed his palm against it. The vault warmed beneath his touch, and thin lines of light spread outward like veins, awakening after centuries of sleep. The hum deepened, filling the hall with a soft vibration. Slowly, the stone parted, revealing an interior that glowed with pale silver light. Inside lay an object neither mechanical nor organic, a crystalline structure shaped like a spiraling seed. It pulsed gently, as if breathing. Father Domenico whispered that this was no relic but a form of ancient technology left behind by the first teachers. Lorenzo felt a reverent awe wash over him. The seed-like object seemed to hold memory, intention, and a quiet longing, as though waiting patiently for the world to understand it. The spiraling seed continued to glow softly, casting shifting patterns across the walls. Lorenzo felt warmth radiating from it, filling the hall with a sense of calm that eased the tension in his chest. Father Domenico whispered that the church had not kept this hidden out of fear of the object, but out of fear of what its revelation might mean for humanity. The seed was a reminder of origins that challenged every story humans had told themselves about purpose. Yet standing there, Lorenzo felt not fear, but a profound tenderness. The first teachers had not abandoned humanity. They had entrusted it with freedom. The church, in turn, had protected that fragile freedom by guarding the truth until the world could meet it without breaking. Lorenzo closed the vault gently, sensing the seed's quiet heartbeat settle back into sleep. He understood now. The silence had always been an act of love. The air changed as Lorenzo and Father Domenico ascended from the vault, carrying with them the lingering warmth of the spiraling seed. When they returned to the main chamber, the chronicles stirred once more, as though recognizing their deeper understanding. Its surface rippled, releasing a faint projection that rose like mist before solidifying into a pale sky unlike any Lorenzo had ever imagined. Shades of soft lavender and pale gold mingled together, stretching across a horizon that curved gently upward. Strange constellations shimmered overhead, forming patterns no human culture had ever recorded. The light carried a quiet, ancient warmth that sank into Lorenzo's bones. This wasn't Earth's sky. This was the world as seen through the memory of the first teachers. Father Domenico whispered in trembling awe that they were witnessing the universe long before humans existed. A memory preserved not to frighten, but to remind humanity that it belonged to something far larger than its fears. The sky felt like a gentle invitation to remember where all beginnings truly rest. The projection expanded, swirling into shapes that began to resemble figures. The first teachers appeared as luminous silhouettes, not quite solid and not quite light, moving with fluid grace across the strange landscape. Their presence filled the chamber with gentle warmth, like sunlight filtered through calm water. Though they seemed distant, their movements carried a sense of longing, as though they were reaching across time to be seen. One last moment. Lorenzo felt a quiet ache rise in his chest as the beings paused, turning toward the invisible memory of early humanity. Their hands glowed faintly, outlining gestures that spoke of hope, guidance, and a careful release of control. Father Domenico whispered that these echoes were not meant to intimidate, but to comfort. Remnants of beings who had once believed in the potential of fragile, uncertain creatures. The chamber felt like a sanctuary of memory, where the past itself breathed softly, waiting to be understood. The scene shifted once more, revealing the first teachers standing before early humans whose faces were filled with confusion and fear. Instead of commanding, the beings knelt, bringing themselves to eye level with the trembling figures. A soft light passed from their palms into the humans' foreheads, spreading warmth through their bodies. The projection suggested no force, only gentle encouragement, as though awakening a spark hidden deep within them. Lorenzo felt humbled watching the exchange. It showed a beginning built not on dominance, but on compassion. Father Domenico whispered that the first teachers had never intended to rule, only to help humanity discover itself. The echo of that moment filled the chamber with a stillness that felt sacred. Lorenzo understood then that the chronicle was not only history. It was a reminder that humanity was born from care, not control, and that freedom had always been an essential part of its design. The projection deepened, showing the moment of departure. The first teachers gathered together, their forms brightening like fading stars, preparing for a final ascent. They raised their hands toward early humanity, not in farewell, but in blessing. The warm pulse of their energy spread outward, settling into the hearts of the humans with soft radiance. Then the beings drifted upward, dissolving into threads of light that scattered across the lavender sky. Lorenzo felt the echo of their intention. They had not left out of abandonment, but out of trust. They wanted humanity to grow by its own choices, to rise from uncertainty with strength earned through struggle. Father Domenico closed his eyes, whispering that this was the moment faith and origin had once been the same story. The chamber dimmed as the final threads of light faded, leaving a warmth that lingered like a gentle promise. The chamber fell into stillness, illuminated only by the lantern and the faint glow of the chronicle resting on the altar. Lorenzo felt a new calm settle inside him, as though the scattered threads of truth had finally woven themselves into something whole. The first teachers had shaped humanity, not to bind it, but to set it free. And faith, rather than contradicting this truth, seemed to echo it. Both paths leading toward growth, meaning, and the quiet beauty of becoming. Father Domenico stepped beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. He spoke softly, saying that perhaps the world was ready, or perhaps it still needed time. But what mattered was that the truth was no longer lost. Lorenzo felt a peaceful weight settle over him, a sense that the past had finally spoken, and its message was one of hope rather than fear. Together they stood in the quiet room, holding a truth that felt both humbling and tender. The chamber's warmth faded into a quiet calm as Lorenzo extinguished the lantern flame until it flickered softly, leaving only the faint glow from the chronicle. The moment felt suspended between centuries, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lorenzo stepped back, feeling the immense weight of everything he had discovered settling onto his shoulders. He sensed that he stood at a crossroads that countless people before him had faced but never crossed. Father Domenico watched him with a softness that carried both pride and sorrow. The older man spoke gently, reminding Lorenzo that truth was not a burden meant for one person, but a light meant for the right moment. Lorenzo closed his eyes, letting that message settle deep into his chest. The silence around them was not empty. It felt full of waiting, full of patience, full of the quiet dignity of those who had protected the truth before him. The choice ahead was not about power. It was about compassion. As Lorenzo prepared to close the chronicle, something slipped free from between its glowing pages. A folded piece of parchment so thin it seemed almost weightless. He opened it carefully, revealing a handwritten message left by someone who had guarded the truth long before him. The ink was faded, but the words were steady. Some truths bloom only when hearts are ready. Lorenzo stared at the message, feeling a gentle ache rise within him. The note carried no author's name, no date, only that single line, yet it felt more personal than anything he had read. It was as if a stranger across centuries had reached out to guide him in this quiet, trembling moment. Father Domenico stepped beside him, whispering that many keepers of the archives had struggled with the same question, whether to reveal or to wait. Lorenzo folded the note slowly, understanding that the truth had always been entrusted with patience, not fear. Lorenzo felt a shift within himself, subtle yet profound. He walked toward the chamber entrance, imagining a world that might one day hold this truth with open hands instead of trembling ones. He saw distant generations standing beneath the same stars, searching for meaning not in fear, but in wonder. He imagined children learning of their origins with curiosity, not confusion. Elders embracing the idea that humanity's beginning was shaped with gentleness, not authority. The vision warmed him, soft as a sunrise spreading across his thoughts. Father Domenico watched him quietly, sensing the change. For the first time in hours, Lorenzo felt hope unburdened by dread. The truth did not need to shatter the world. It simply needed a world ready to grow into it. He knew he might never see that future, but the thought of it filled the chamber with a comfort that felt almost sacred. Together, Lorenzo and Father Domenico walked back to the altar where the chronicle rested. Lorenzo placed both hands upon its surface, feeling a warmth that pulsed slowly, as though the manuscript sensed the moment of farewell. With a steady breath, he closed it gently, letting the glow fade until the pages returned to their quiet, dormant state. Father Domenico stood beside him, saying nothing, for words felt too small against the tenderness of the moment. The chamber dimmed, holding its breath once more as Lorenzo stepped back. He reached for the mechanism that would seal the chamber, and for the first time he did not feel fear or uncertainty. Instead, he felt gratitude toward the first teachers, toward the monks who had protected this truth, and toward every hand that had carried the secret with love instead of force. The chamber would sleep again, but this time it felt like a peaceful rest, not a burial. The ancient doorway whispered shut with a low, echoing sigh, sending a soft ripple of dust through the corridor. Lorenzo placed his palm against the cool bronze, feeling the quiet heartbeat of the sealed chamber beyond. It no longer felt like a prison for hidden knowledge. It felt like a sanctuary, patiently waiting for the world to grow into its truth. Father Domenico stepped beside him, leaning softly on the wall as if relieved to share the weight at last. Together they walked down the silent corridor, their steps slow and deliberate, as though carrying the echo of everything they had learned. The lantern's warm glow followed them, stretching their shadows long across the floor. At the end of the passage, Lorenzo paused and looked back one final time. He felt no regret, only a deep, steady peace. Some truths needed time, and now the truth would wait, still as stone, patient as dawn, ready for the day humanity reached out to meet it.